He says that his upbringing shaped his current prepping lifestyle.
Prepping for me started on 9/11. That was the day everyone in this country realized bad things happen to people. The world is a dangerous place. When I was about 14, my father gave me a book that was about a group of people coming together to prepare for the collapse of society. It gave me a lot of starting blocks of things to think about, like how to defend myself. I have a larger selection of tools to choose from, whether it's a combat shotgun, long-range rifles. For people who aren't prepping, having 2,000 to 3,000 rounds is really alarming, but in more rural areas, that's a weekend of target shooting. With the MREs I have on hand, they would last me 2 to 3 months. MRE stands for meals ready to eat. They are just meals that are long-term shelf sustainable, like 12 to 25 years. Today, my main focus is on protection and transportation. I studied cultures like the Australian outback, where they have to go hundreds of miles without any kind of resupply. So I bought a Suburban and set it up following the way they set up their vehicles, with extra gas, extra supplies. I feel like it's incredibly naive to not prepare to some degree. All empires have fallen. It's inevitable that the American empire will fall. The best time to start prepping is yesterday. The second best time is today.
You've been listening to everything we've been talking about here,
Yes, sir.
right? Is this consistent with your mindset and ideology?
In general, yes. I think it's a little out of touch for most Americans. This gentleman mentioned being able to spend $2,000 to $3,000 to come to his ranch, but 45% of Americans don't have $1,000 saved up for if their transmission breaks down.
And you grew up in a community, a religious community, where self-sufficiency and growing your own food, not relying on the government, being kind of insular in the community was a way of life, right?
Yes, sir.
And you think that serves you well?
Oh, 100%.
Yeah. And you talk about something called operational security. What do you mean by that?
Operational security is just the concept of keeping your resources and supplies secret so that you are blending in to protect those resources.
You say even so, within the community, there's a lot of distrust?
In my experience, yes. Like, communities don't talk, typically, within the overarching community. You train with the people you're close to or practice skills with the people you're close to, but there's not a lot of cross-community training. I think a lot of people, or a lot of individual communities, are scared to be labeled like a militia.
One of the things that you two have in common, have talked about, is lots of guns and lots of ammunition.
They're tools just like any other. I can hunt with an AK or an AR, and if I need to protect myself with it, I can.
Sir, if I could jump in.
Please.
You cannot survive in a big city in a collapse. When the grid's down, no municipal water systems, any kind of disaster, if there's no food deliveries, you can't survive in a city. So you gotta leave. So where are you gonna go? Everyone's gonna think, oh, I'll run to the forest and survive there. Yeah, tens of millions, hundreds of millions potentially running into our forests. You're gonna be looking for deer to hunt. Well, I can tell you, as soon as the collapse starts, every Fortitude Ranch, we're shooting every animal we can, deer, et cetera, wild boar in Texas. We're shooting everything we can, and we're making jerky out of it to get more food. And a lot of people are gonna do that. So by the time you get from the city into the forest, there's not gonna be a whole lot of deer left, most likely. And there's gonna be a lot of other people there with you in the forest with the same plan. I gotta try to survive out here. And there's just not enough food out there to keep people going. So sooner or later, you're gonna run into another marauder group or other starving people. And so that's why he does have a lot of great weapons. And the people who want to outlaw AR-15s and military-capable weapons, you know, from the prepper perspective, they're lunatics. They're working to help marauder groups if they do that. But whether natural or man-manipulated means or a laboratory accident, Wuhan, for example, it could happen tomorrow. And when that happens, it's going to be If it's H5N1, it's the worst disaster in mankind's history, and massive starvation and people trying to stay alive through marauding.
And you say the death rate will be what?
I think depending on how long it lasts, most of the population will die in those situations. They'll starve to death, or they'll be killed by other people trying to get food.
How is your ranch going to survive a nuclear blast?
So we withstand nuclear blast by staying away from targets. So we're in really remote rural areas. You could drop a nuclear weapon 10 kiloton, Hiroshima size, directly over me, and with 3 feet of earth, I'm okay.
Dr. Bradley Garrett spent 3 years studying extreme preppers and even wrote a book about it called Bunker Building for the End of Times. Doctor, you spent a lot of time, 3 years, with different groups. And you said that something really jumped out. It was kind of common among these groups. What was it?
I spent 3 years, went to 8 different countries, interviewed about 100 people. Some of them, as you say, were quite extreme in their preparations. Others were worried about more on the practical prepping side, putting things together so they could get through a blackout for 3 days, learning how to grow their own food. But the thing that really struck me is I expected people to be anxious and paranoid and sort of obsessed with the idea of being able to mitigate these future disasters. What I actually found is that most of the preppers that I ran into, they were actually full of hope. Because if you don't believe that there's going to be a future, there's no point in preparing for it. So when I spoke to them about their preparations, they said, look, this gives me a sense of peace and security, but it also is altruistic in some ways, because if you've got your preparations in place, you're taking some strain off of the system. If something does go wrong, you don't need to be rescued anymore. And in fact, you might be in a position that you can help someone else because you've got your preparations in place. So, this is the beauty of doing research, especially long-term research, is often you end up learning something you absolutely didn't expect to learn.
Yeah, you weren't looking for that, but you found out a completely different mindset. When you were talking to these people in these different countries, was there a consistent belief system in terms of what was going to trigger all of this preparation they had done?
People were prepping for a wide range of things. And of course, in different countries, you might have more of a social safety net, or you might have more influence from the state. In Switzerland, for instance, they've got space in their bunkers for every person in the country. And that was mandated by a law in 1963 at the height of the Cold War. They started building that infrastructure. In the United States, it wasn't feasible. The country's too big, we had too many people. In terms of what they're preparing for, it's a wide range. A lot of people were very concerned about the climate crisis. That's more of a practical prepping day-to-day scenario. And others are worried about an EMP or nuclear war, much larger scale concerns.
Mm-hmm. In some of these countries where guns are not so prolific, how were they going to defend all of the things that they had accumulated to survive with? Was that a concern there the way it is here?
In many of the places that I visited, there was an expectation that they weren't just prepping for themselves, they were prepping for the community. And so the resources that they had stockpiled would be shared out. And the expectation was if everyone is prepping, everyone's in a better position to help everyone else.
Did you come away from this being more optimistic, or did you have more hope after being around these people, or did you think they were overreacting, paranoid? How did you come away from it?
A lot of people were overreacting to what I thought were essentially conspiracy theories. But I'll tell you, I lived in an apartment that I was renting before I wrote this book. Now I live on a 5-acre ranch. There was so much practicality in what they were telling me about becoming more self-sufficient, understanding where your energy comes from, where your water comes from, being able to stockpile enough food to get yourself through just a small period of time. I think that's something that all of us can take away. And I do think that before I wrote this book, I had an unreasonable expectation that someone else was going to take care of me in a disaster. And many Americans have experienced this throughout COVID. So I think it was a wake-up call for a lot of people going through that and realizing that there might not be someone there to save you in the event of a terrible disaster.
Yeah, that is really interesting. I'm so glad you did that. And we're going to put a link to the book on our website so people can find it and read it and see what's there, because it's interesting observations. And well, I think I want to ask the audience one final question. After being part of this conversation, what will you do? So 1, will you store more food? 2, purchase weapons and ammo? 3, build a bunker or buy into one? Or 4, do nothing different? All right, well, the results are in, and 49.4% says, I'm going to store more food. 10.7 is, I'm going to buy some weapons. 4.3, I'm going to build or buy into a bunker. And 35% of you say, no, I'm not going to do anything. I think that says that this conversation has had an impact on you.